Hello, and welcome back to the next episode of This Healthy Life podcast. I'm very excited to have Dr. Bill Rawls as our guest today. Dr. Bill Rawls has been dedicating his life to medicine for the past 30 years. A health crisis with chronic Lyme disease led him to explore alternative treatments and restoring his health through holistic herbal therapies. And inspired by his journey, he's here to share his expertise on cellular wellness and helping others establish their own path to wellness. He is also the best-selling author of 2 books, Unlocking Lyme and The Cellular Wellness Solution. Dr. Rawls, so excited to have you here today and share your wealth of knowledge. Welcome. And I would love to start by diving in and having you do a quick intro about yourself and share a little bit about your own personal story and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. You know, we all have a story, just like you. Mine is probably a little bit similar to yours, but it's people don't do something different in the medical field unless they're challenged in some way. And that was the case in my case also. And so I have been a physician for over 30 years. I started with conventional training, went into obstetrics and gynecology because it dealt with bringing life into the world and a well population. And, it was just really very uplifting. The downside of that is 30 years ago, it required being on call for labor and delivery in the emergency room every other night, every second to third night, every second to third weekend. And when I had somebody in the hospital, I just couldn't sleep. So it was a lot of sleepless nights. And in my 30s, I could do it. By the time I had my mid-40s, I was really struggling. And I was losing the ability to sleep normally. But more than that, my whole body started falling apart. I mean, everything. My joints were falling apart. I was having really significant cardiac issues, brain issues. I mean, just everything. And went the conventional route first. All the testing that everybody goes through, and really found not much of anything. I mean, and what it boils down to is you have to be really, really sick for conventional testing to really show up anything. And if you go through, if you have a lot of symptoms and you don't end up with a diagnosis, you're better off, because what that means is you're probably not beyond the point of returning to a normal health, or it's going to be a whole lot easier. So I identified with fibromyalgia because it just wasn't anything else. But I had in my mind, I was bitten by ticks my whole life. I never got sick after a tick bite, but I'm just bitten by ticks, bound to be something there. So I kept searching, finally found that diagnosis for the Lyme bacteria, and thought antibiotics, hey, this is going to make me well and I'm going to be fine. It didn't. I got sicker. And ultimately that led to searching the alternative world for all the options that you can imagine, many of which you have been exposed to too. And they helped, but they didn't make that much difference. They didn't get me my life back. I found an herbal protocol, pretty intense, antimicrobial herbs that killed microbes. And I thought, it might work, but might be like the antibiotics, that it's just going to wreck my gut. And it didn't. I started getting better. Over 3 months, a lot of my symptoms eased. Within a year, I was about 70% better. Awesome. Took a long time to get rid of the neurological and cardiac symptoms, several years. But got my life back and changed my life, changed my practice. I gave up obstetrics just for a period of time. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I kind of reached the point I didn't want to. It's just I really got so I valued my sleep a lot, and I felt like I could help people in other ways. So I really devoted my life to understanding why the herbs had worked so well, and what this thing we call chronic Lyme disease really is, and how that ties in very closely with so many, if not all, other chronic illnesses. And that's kind of where I am now.
Amazing. And I'd love for you to touch a little bit on, you mentioned like when you go to regular doctor and you do the diagnostics and like nothing's showing up, like there's a chance that you're still able to come back from that. But once you start testing positive for all these other conditions, it's a little bit harder to come back from that. Why do you think Western medicine and just kind of regular medicine is so obsessed with just kind of like testing and finding something wrong and giving you a band-aid versus actually kind of digging deeper and looking for those root causes and like looking at your symptoms and what could be causing those things?
Right. Yeah. It's, I think it's always been that way,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you go into, you feel bad, you have symptoms, you feel terrible all over, and you want something that's going to fix that pretty fast. So our focus is normalizing those symptoms as quickly as we can. So if you ask that question, well, what is a symptom? Well, a symptom is evidence of a dysfunctional process in your body. Something is going wrong, whether that's heart symptom, brain symptom, it's something going on inside the body. So when you look at that approach, what we do with virtually all medical therapies is we somehow artificially block that dysfunctional process. So dysfunction is the key to illness. If you're well, you don't have dysfunction. You don't have symptoms. So we're treating that dysfunction. But what we don't do is treat the underlying causes that are driving the dysfunction, and therefore people don't get well. So people in chronic illness typically end up in a state of managed illness instead of getting well.
Mm-hmm.
And we really, in conventional medicine, they tend to get confused about what's a cause and what's a process. So everybody, talk to any doctor. It's like, what's the cause of X disease? They'll say inflammation, and they're dead wrong. They're dead wrong. Inflammation is a dysfunctional process. It results from other causes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not getting to those underlying causes that are driving that dysfunctional process, that inflammation, person isn't going to get well. You might suppress it, you might slow down the damage, but they're not going to get well. And all these drugs we have out there that block inflammation in some way typically they block other really important processes. I mean, it's like you hear about an autoimmune disease and it's like there's a new new immune drug that's out there that's going to treat these symptoms and help you get better. And, so it might reduce symptoms, it might slow progression, but all of that they read off at the end very quickly, risk of death, blah, 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 blah,
like
blah,
the side
blah.
effects are worse than what you're trying
Those
to
are
fix.
real.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I want to touch on the concept of cellular wellness. So that's the topic of your next book. So can you talk a little bit about what that means and how that can be something that people with chronic illness can use as a way to start healing themselves?
Yeah, it took me 20 years to get to this very simple concept. And now I rattle it off so easily. And it's like, and it's so obvious. So we talked about dysfunctional processes, right? So when you look at the human body, there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of different processes going on at any given point in time. And so all of those processes can become dysfunctional. So there are a lot of different ways that someone can become chronically ill and a lot of different drugs to treat it. But if you ask that question, what causes those processes to happen? And the answer is cells. Our body is made of cells. Absolutely everything, every function, every process going on inside the body is done by cells. Whether that's your heart beating, your thyroid hormone being produced, your brain impulses firing, getting up and walking across the room. Healing is a cellular process. When we get injured, it's cells rebuilding our skin and our ligaments and our joints. So everything that happens in the body is done by cells. So when you bring it down to the simplest functional unit in the body, it's that cell. Cells are all structurally similar. They all have the same machinery. Now that machinery has been modified in various different ways so that different cells have different jobs in the body, but they're all about the same. So if you look at them as little microscopic machines, they have operating requirements. Every cell in the body needs the same things. So every cell in the body needs the right nutrients. So now different cells need some different nutrients, like your thyroid cells need iodine to produce thyroid hormone. Heart cells, they run off of fat. Brain cells, they like carbohydrate. But if you're eating a well-rounded whole food diet, you're going to give all your cells everything they need. Cells need a clean environment. So whether you're exposed to natural toxic substances like mycotoxins or all the stuff that's in our environment now, in our food, in our water, in our air, these unnatural chemicals get embedded in our cells and they block the cell's functions. So the cell may work, but it's not going to work as well. It's going to have to work harder, and it's going to burn out faster. So clean environment. Number 3, all cells need downtime. Now, some cells, like our heart cells, have to rest in between beats because our cell never stops. But most of our cells require downtime during the day and sleep at night to recover. So if you're starting your day tired and you need some caffeine to get you going, what that means is you didn't get adequate sleep. Your cells did not recover from the day before, because working, that's hard. So there's a lot of wear and tear. So our cells need to rebuild. And if they're not getting that downtime, they don't rebuild. You're working with deficient cells. So sleep, downtime, freedom from mental stress. 4, they need good blood flow. They need good blood flow to flush away toxic substances, metabolic waste, and deliver oxygen and nutrients. Really important. And that comes from being physically active. So there's some stress with physical activity, but some of that stress is actually good. It gets our cells going and helps them rebuild, and they're getting that good blood flow that's how we stay alive. Inactivity is really bad. And the 5th one, microbes. And, we can talk about chronic Lyme all day, but the fact is we are exposed to low-grade microbe threats, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, yeast, all through our lifetimes. And this idea that we get an infection, get symptoms, and then our immune system eradicates the microbe is false. And that's been well proven in the scientific literature. Many things that we pick up in life, including tick-borne microbes, never leave our body. If our body is healthy, these things distribute throughout our cells, and they can become dormant inside of our cells. And this includes Borrelia, Bartonella, all the tick-borne microbes, but many others. Mycoplasma, Chlamydia, Epstein-Barr, all of these things can become dormant inside our tissues. In our brain cells, we have a microbiome of the brain, actually. Our joints, our heart, everywhere. And as long as we're healthy, taking good care of ourselves, we're okay. But if we're doing those other things, we're not sleeping, we're not eating a good diet, we're not doing the things that we need to do to keep our cells healthy, these things reactivate and they start breaking down our tissues. And at that point, your immune system starts working against you because it sees these microbes emerging from cells, starts attacking the cells. And that's what autoimmunity is. So we have all of this. So basically, the microbes are emerging and breaking down our tissues to create a food supply to grow more microbes. And that, in a nutshell, is what every single chronic illness is. And because different microbes invade different cells, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. But every symptom can be traced to that. And you look at these factors, those 5 stress factors. Take any illness. Take MS. I pulled a study the other day on MS looking at the causes. They decided, well, it's multifactorial. It's more, it's always a combination of stress factors. And they listed them: diet, toxins in the environment, not having downtime for sleep, not being physically active. And then they listed off microbes. And Borrelia, the Lyme microbe, was on the list, but also chlamydia and Epstein-Barr and mycoplasma and these other things too. So they can manifest different ways. And so one conclusion with the study, though, is, a lot of Lyme people have MS symptoms.
Yep.
Why does somebody progress? And that's where genetics comes in. So genetics is such that they were able to, in this study, define numerous mutations that people had that progressed to MS. So that was a big risk factor. I don't define it as a cause, because you can have bad mutations and not get sick. What the mutations do is they put you at more risk for certain kinds of stress factors, microbes, etc. So that, in a nutshell, is what chronic illness is, but it's also the formula for how we stay well.
Mm-hmm. Not only just chronic illness, just everyone that wants to kind of reach optimal health and feel good should be following those 5 things, right? Really, I mean, it sounds so simple, but in your day-to-day life, it can be so difficult to even accomplish one of those things. So I want to touch a little bit on herbs as well. So I know that you mentioned that herbs really helped you in your healing path, and would love to hear how those can help restore your body on a cellular level. Do you use them just for killing microbes, or do you use them to support the body, or some of these other functions that can support your cellular health as well?
Yeah. Herbs give you an edge that you can't get otherwise. So you're right. Doing those things is hard, especially if you're not used to doing them. Now, I've spent a lot of time, I'm 67 now, and to do all the things that I want to do, I'm particular about my diet and my bedtime and getting my 8 hours of sleep and staying physically active. But I was doing all those things during my recovery before herbs, and they were helping, but they weren't getting me where I need to be. And you're right, if you're stuck in chronic illness, it's really hard to get those things done.
Yep.
So what the herbs are doing is protecting your cells in a way that nothing else can. There is nothing on the planet that can protect your cells like taking herbs. And so basically what you're doing with an herb is you're borrowing the plant's defense and regulatory system. So what we're getting from an herb is not nutrients, not vitamins, none of that. What we're getting is the chemicals of the plant, what we call phytochemicals, that the plant uses to protect its cells from free radicals, toxic substances, radiation, and microbes of every variety. So every herb has antimicrobial properties, but it's not targeted to one microbe. It's against a broad spectrum of microbes. And it's not one chemical like an antibiotic. It's this spectrum of hundreds of chemicals. So there's a certain intelligence about it. Basically, we're borrowing the plant's immune system. And so what it's doing is it's selective for pathogens. That was the really interesting thing for me. I thought, if these things are going to work, it's going to kill my normal flora like antibiotics do. It didn't. And that's one of the most remarkable things about herbs is they don't disrupt the normal flora in your gut. In fact, I found that the herbs work better than probiotics for balancing your gut because it selectively suppresses pathogen, but it doesn't affect your normal flora. And it doesn't promote resistance. Take an antibiotics for 10 days and you will start depressing your normal flora to a critical level. And by that point in time, 10 days is all it takes to start generating resistance to that antibiotic. That doesn't happen with herbs.
Is there a certain herb that you recommend taking? Say you do have to take antibiotics or something if you want to help to kind of like jumpstart and restore your gut. You mentioned that some of the herbs work better than probiotics. Is there a particular herb for gut healing?
There was a study that showed that a lot of herbs do that, and it's not surprising. Now, some herbs have stronger antimicrobial properties than others, and it really has to do with the microbe stress in the plant's natural environment. So, a place like the Amazon that has a lot of microbe stress, you're going to find herbs with stronger antimicrobial properties. But also, you're going to get a broader spectrum. So using multiple herbs, typically formulas of 6 or more herbs, has a broader effect, that you're going to get a broader spectrum of coverage. But again, you're still not going to disrupt your normal flora. But even something like garlic, ginger, you can get those at the grocery store. They're really good. Many other herbs, an herb called andrographis that is especially good as an antiviral. It has properties against influenza and also SARS virus that causes COVID. It's great for balancing the gut. It was found in one study to actually work as well as drugs for ulcerative colitis.
Wow.
So it's really good. But there are many, many others that you can use, and it gives you kind of a broad spectrum of coverage. But the herbs are always doing more than just killing microbes, and I think that's important. They're also protecting your cells. Because when you look at health, your health is directly related to the health of your cells. And if your cells are stressed, then they're more vulnerable to microbes. Mm-hmm. And so, restoring the health of your cells is just really important.
Mm-hmm. And then I have a question as far as restoring the health of your cells. So there's a big movement now on kind of like the cellular membrane and using like phosphatidylcholine and phospholipids to kind of repair that membrane. Is that something that you find is important that needs to be a part of the cell healing, or not so much, more focus on the other items?
Not so much.
Not so much.
Because, here's the deal. Those kinds of fats are readily prevalent in nature, right? Eat a whole food diet. That's all you got to do. So think about it this way. So a lot of different kinds of cells are going to have those specific fats, all right? Mm-hmm. Now, plant cells have cell walls, but you're still using, if you're eating any kind of meat, or many other kinds of cells have all, and especially eggs, have all of these fats. So it's readily available in a healthy diet. So what I see as a problem is people are trying to make up for a bad diet with taking supplements like that. If you're eating a whole food diet, you're going to do fine. So think about it this way. An apple has got 25 grams of carbohydrate in it, right? So it's carbohydrate. And say a cookie, a couple of cookies have about 25 grams of carbohydrate. Same. So what's the big difference here? The apple, all the carbohydrate is contained inside cells, all of it. So that whole food source is a whole cell source. So all the parts of the cells, the cell wall, the membranes, all of those things nourish us in different ways. So it's not, we're not just getting the raw carbohydrate, we're getting all these parts of cells. So if you're eating a well-balanced whole food diet, you're eating a whole cell diet with all the parts of the cells that are going to give all of your cells what they need to function.
That makes sense.
And those supplements, the nutrient supplements, aren't quite as important, right? So if you're eating a really bad diet, you can show a response from the supplements, but it's pretty small. If you're eating a really good whole food diet, it's not going to make much difference. Those cookies, raw carbohydrate and fat that's been pulled out of seeds. No cells, no cell parts. Not the same.
No nutrition. Awesome. And then, so I'd love to talk a little bit about your company, Vital Plants. So you have something called the Restore Kit. Can you share a little bit about what that does and what the kit includes and what kind of, health benefits that you can get from that as well?
Sure. Well, I built that kit and in response to my journey with chronic Lyme disease. And, what I realized from the research that I did and reading other authors that were looking at herbs as a solution to this problem was it wasn't like one herb or one little bottle of tincture. It took a lot of phytochemistry. And and I think that's where people are missing out on herbal therapy. They're just not getting nearly enough of the concentration of the herbs that they actually need. And so, I was taking, it was like I had a shoebox full of stuff that I used to lug around with me, and it was tinctures and standardized extracts and all this stuff. And it was a lot to keep up with. So I pieced together what I thought would really make the most difference. And over a 5-year period, started building out a protocol and got it down to 4 bottles. It's just,
Makes it
and
easy.
some nutrients are important, like certain B vitamins for people have issues methylating, and glutathione and some of these other kinds of things. So there are some nutrients that are really important for someone struggling with chronic illness because their cells are working overtime. And so if your cells are working overtime, they need more nutrients. But it's mainly herbs. But we got it down so it's like 3 capsules out of 4 bottles twice a day. That's it. But even that, I don't see as a one size fits all. It's more of a foundation to build on. About half of people, that's all they're going to need. But for a lot of people, if they want more, they can add to that, and it just makes the whole process easier. So it's got core herbs that have been shown in studies out of Johns Hopkins to be beneficial for Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, like Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullcap, and cat's claw, andrographis, I mentioned. So these are some of the key herbs, but also paired with adaptogens that help us balance our stress hormones and that sort of thing. Reishi mushroom, cordyceps, Romania, and so it has all these other herbs and herbs for protecting your functions, like protecting your liver cells with milk thistle and protecting your heart with hawthorn and other herbs. So it's as comprehensive as I could get it and still have it in a functional package. But it's not exclusive for Lyme disease. I look at it as a cell protection system, because the antimicrobial properties of the herbs are very broad, and in all of them, it's just this wonderful cell protection system, which is that's what you need. That's how, and no matter what you're struggling with, it can really help you get back to where you need to be, and as far as cellular health. You have to do your part. The better diet you can eat, the more sleep you can get, all of those kinds of things. So there's still some work to do, but that's going to give you an edge that it's going to be really hard to get otherwise.
Okay. And then, so is this something that you recommend staying on for kind of just regular maintenance once you do the initial kit, or is it something that you kind of pulse or just use as needed to maintain that cellular health and kind of benefits that you get from it?
I look at it as most people need an intensive that typically lasts 6 months, but some people more like 2 years. When I was going through this, I was looking at it like, okay, this is therapy, and I'm trying to keep up with all these different supplements in this box, and things would run out, and I would be like 70, 80% better and go, and things would run out. And it's like, I'm doing okay now. I'm a lot better. I'm good. And then some stresses would come along, and I'd be right back where I started and have to restart the whole thing. And I finally got to the point of like, I feel better on the herbs. I don't have gut dysfunction on the herbs. They're making everything better. So I'm just going to take them at pretty high concentrations. I mean, I got a little paranoid about coming off of them. So I did them pretty intensely for about 5 years. Most people don't have to do it that long because, like I said, I was kind of on and off, and it was a lot to keep up with all of these things. But that's how long it took to really eliminate the cardiac and neurological symptoms, which are really, really stubborn. It does take time. Yep. Most people can do it faster. But even then, I suggest, stepping down and staying on some herbal protocol. So I've been taking herbs continually now, I guess, coming up on 20 years.
Wow.
like 17, 18 years, I've been taking them continually. Not at that intensity that I once did, but I do it every day. And, at 67, even with all that happening, I mean, I thought my life was pretty much at an end by age 50. I thought, what is it, the rest going to be like? It's just going to be terrible.
Yeah.
67, still kite
You're
surfing,
doing
doing all
good.
the things
That's
that I want to
awesome.
do. My joints are fine. Not having heart issues. Brain still works. It's good.
And then do you think being on these herbs, since they do treat microbes like Borrelia and things like that, do you feel that they can be used almost kind of like a prophylactic? Like say you do get bitten by a tick, but you're taking all these herbs, are your chances of developing Lyme and getting sick a little bit lower because you're already taking something that's kind of attacking the
Yeah,
microbes right away?
right. Yes, absolutely. And it's these things are prophylactic for anything, though, right? I mean, they're just, it's something, when you look at what's most missing in our diet right now, it's these important phytochemicals. For hundreds of thousands of years, people ate a forage food diet. And what that was about 2/3 plant matter. Average person on earth ate as many as 500 different plants a year, but they were
Wow.
all wild plants, not cultivated plants. So they were getting tons of these phytochemicals. So as we moved toward farming, we started cultivating food, and we cultivated food to produce calories, not phytochemicals. So we actually bred the protective properties out of our plants at the expense of producing calories. So even our best foods, like, and I recommend that everybody eats more vegetables than anything else. And there's a lot of good stuff in broccoli and celery and all these things, but not nearly as much as what was in their wild cousins before they were cultivated. But we also started eating mainly seeds, which have virtually no phytochemicals in them. But for thousands of years, we replaced that with culinary and medicinal herbs. We don't do that anymore. We replaced all that with drugs about 100 years ago. So we're not getting it. And it's really important, and we're
Yeah.
missing out. So I think it is important for everyone to take these things, not just for tick-borne things, because we're constantly exposed to stuff. And these are all low-grade pathogens. People will raise their eyebrows when I say that about the tick-borne microbes because they really consider them a monster. But these are things that humans have been exposed to since the beginning of humans. And typically, most people bitten by a tick that's carrying Borrelia, the Lyme microbe, do not become acutely ill. And that's the real problem, because you don't get antibiotics unless you have symptoms if you follow the CDC guidelines.
Yep.
So what that means is that most people aren't getting treated that are picking up this bacteria. But hey, one tick species they found carried over 237 different genera, families of bacteria. And we don't know what most of them do, and we don't know their pathogenic potential. But they're all very likely low-grade pathogens. A high-grade pathogen, Ebola virus, causes severe acute illness. These microbes don't cause a severe acute illness. I read your story. It is very unusual for someone to become ill at the time of a tick bite. And that's typically when they get a big load of microbes, or they had other stress factors going on at the same time that gave those bacteria a little bit of an
Definitely had
upper
mold
hand.
issues. Like,
Yeah. So there's generally something else going on.
that was already
But
weakening me.
95% of the people that I talk to with chronic Lyme don't remember becoming ill around the tick bite. So again, what's happening is these things are getting into our system, and they're becoming dormant, and later they reactivate and they wreak havoc. But it's not just tick-borne microbes. There are a lot of things. Somebody can have all the symptoms of chronic Lyme and not ever been bitten by a tick and not be carrying Borrelia, because there's so many other microbes that can cause similar kinds of symptoms. So that's why I don't do a lot of testing. And with the herbs, You don't necessarily need to
because they're
because
working
your
more broad
spectrum of
spectrum.
coverage is so broad.
Yeah, which makes it a little more cost effective, right? Instead of spending so much money on testing and trying to figure out what you have. And I think a lot of times when you do the testing and you get a diagnosis for one specific thing, it's so easy to be like, oh, that's my Bartonella acting up, or oh, that's my Borrelia. But it's like, you don't really
Exactly.
know, right? Like you mentioned, there's over 300 different bacterias or pathogens that people don't even know what they are yet. And then
Yep.
even Lyme has 300 different strains, and, you don't know which one you have. So I think that's why the herbs just, kind of settle that in your mind a little bit, and you're like, I know I'm going after everything that I have and going to be healing on a different level. So it's another advantage, I think, to using the herbs and kind of the more broad spectrum approach.
Yeah, and the studies have given me even more confidence to say that. I mean, I was saying that 10 years ago, but we were just basing it on a lot of people reporting benefits. But there was a series of studies that came out of Johns Hopkins that found that the herbs that I'm talking about actually were superior to antibiotics for Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia. And I've gotten to the point that I just assume that Bartonella and Babesia are there too because so many people have it. And, why not just cover it with the herbs? Now, doctors can't do that because drugs are specific for specific microbes, and the drugs have a lot of toxicity. So you don't want to treat somebody with something they don't have. But it's with the herbs, you have more freedom because the toxicity is so much lower and the spectrum of coverage is so much greater.
Are there any herbs that are a little bit more complicated or dangerous to use or have more side effects that you need to be careful with versus others that are more gentle on the system?
There are, and you have to look at this thing from the spectrum of there are a lot of different plants out there, and they're solving problems different ways. So poison ivy has some great antimicrobial properties, but I sure wouldn't recommend it for someone to take it because it has chemistry that just isn't compatible with ours.
Yep.
And that's true of some herbs. Some of the ones that were on the Johns Hopkins studies, like clove, artemisia, tend to have a lot more side effects. They can cause a lot more toxicity to tissues. I tend to stay away from those herbs. I'm looking for herbs that have a very, very low potential for harm, but also have proven efficacy. And so that's one of the things that I did with the Restore Kit is really focus on the things that people could take for a long time that wouldn't cause them harm. Now, maybe these other herbs, you bring them in periodically just to give somebody a boost. That is worth considering. But for that foundational protocol, I like herbs that really have a very, very low potential for harm, but also a high potential for not only antimicrobial properties, but cellular benefits.
Yep. That makes sense. Makes it more accessible, easier to take, and not have to worry about taking it long term or having any side effects on top of already having like herxing and already feeling bad. Like no one wants to take something that's going to make them feel worse. Awesome. And then so I want to touch on your two books as well. So you have two best-selling books. You have Unlocking Lyme, and then you have the Cellular Wellness Solution. What can people expect to find in both those books? And does the Cellular Wellness Solution, is that good for people with Lyme as well? Or is that just people generally struggling with their health, and kind of who is your audience for both?
Yeah. Both of them fit a lot of different things. So writing has always been my therapy. Even in my early days as a physician, I was constantly doing handouts to give people to help them work on their health in various different ways. And that progressed to writing books to try to get information to people. So Unlocking Lyme, I was published in 2017, and it was all the knowledge I'd accumulate to that point. And I recognized by then that Lyme disease was a lot bigger than just this single bacteria carried by ticks. That I've said so many times, the only difference between somebody with fibromyalgia and somebody with chronic Lyme disease is the person with chronic Lyme has figured out some way to get a positive test. And so it really was looking at that. But since that time, my journey has progressed more to looking at health at the cellular level and recognizing this bigger microbe story of what's being called the dormant blood and tissue microbiome of all these microbes. And what it boils down to is it's not just ticks or other things. Things right now, right as we're speaking, there are bacteria crossing over from our gut, from our skin, from our sinuses into our bloodstream, from our gums, and entering our bloodstream. And some of those things get past our immune system and become embedded in our tissues. And it's been documented in red blood cells. There have been studies, good studies, like half dozen studies, different places around the world where they took blood from healthy volunteers and found that they had dormant bacteria inside the red blood cells. Not just from the outside, from the gut and from the skin. And it, so you start to realize this idea that we're sterile inside, that we have bacteria in our gut and on our skin, and that's our microbiome, but our tissues, nah, that's sterile. It's just not true. And study after study is showing that. It really does look like the foundation for understanding all of chronic illness. And it really points to non-drug solutions as the best way to overcome these illnesses, or at least reach the highest level of a person's health. And the drugs, they really don't have capacity to reduce cellular stress at all. So they can block processes. Sometimes that's valuable. You burn out enough thyroid cells and you need thyroid hormone. So there are definitely applications for all medical therapies. But if that's all you're doing, then you're really not serving the patient well. But these are things that we can get out there. And through this podcast, I can talk to people about things. I caution people not to be intimidated by the book. It's like this thick. It's huge. But it's 4 books in one. So the first book is about 100 pages. It's explaining that cellular wellness model. The second book is how herbs are really important for that. So it's like a primer on understanding all the basics of what you need to know about herbs from a scientific point of view, not a traditional herbal medicine point of view. The third book is just all the other things you need to do, what a healthy diet is, what a detoxed environment is, all of those parameters. And then the last part of the book, the final part, is applying those principles to specific problems, gut issues, menopause, everything. So it's got a lot of information in there, and it's not specific to Lyme, but anybody who has Lyme can pick it up and read it.
Benefit from it.
We have a lot of loyal folks that follow us, and they've read the book and said, "Hey, this is great. Yeah, it does. It does apply to all of my needs too."
Sounds like everyone needs it. Everyone needs to be doing this. So,
yep.
Whether you're sick or not, definitely don't want to do it once you get sick. It always takes a lot longer to chip your way out of sickness than to just do something good for your body ahead of time. So, had I known, I would have probably been in a very different place when I got Lyme. So
it's true, but sometimes things happen to us for a reason. So the things that you're doing matter, and you're making the world a better place,
Yeah,
so that's what it's all about.
Trying to share my story and share my healing and hope that others find their path as well. So amazing. Dr. Rawls, thank you so much for joining. It's been such a pleasure to have you here today. I do want to share that we have code Trail to Health. It gets you 20% off your first Vital Plan order. So if anyone out there wants to try the kit, I'm going to go ahead and link to it in the show notes as well. And if people want to reach out to you and find you on social media, what's the best place to find you?
I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is RawlsMD. There's also a Vital Plan account, but I post on Instagram, almost daily. I have someone that helps me manage it, but I do videos, that several times a week, just trying to get little tidbits of information out there to help people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and link to everything in the show notes, and I appreciate all
Great.
your wealth of knowledge that you shared today.
Thank you.
You.
I do appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much.